The story of Jeffrey Epstein, it's not really about just one man, is it? It's a case that rips the lid off this dark intersection of incredible wealth, immense power, and a justice system that, for a very long time, seemed to be looking the other way. So today, we're going to try and unravel this whole thing. We'll dissect his criminal network, pinpoint exactly where the system broke down, and figure out what those infamous Epstein files actually tell us.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down. We'll start with the island, the hub of it all. Then we'll look at how his whole network actually worked. After that, we'll dive into how the justice system failed so spectacularly the first time around, what happened when they got a second chance, and finally, we'll try to decode what's really in those so-called Epstein files.
Every dark story has a setting, a place where it all goes down. For Jeffrey Epstein, that main stage was this private island in the Caribbean, Little St. James. And men, from the outside, it looked like an absolute paradise. But what was hiding behind those beautiful shores was, well, something else entirely.
And this right here, this is the key to understanding Epstein's whole world. On the one hand, you have the public image, this amazing luxury retreat for the super rich. But on the other hand, when you listen to the victims, when you look at the records, it wasn't a paradise. It was a prison, meticulously designed for total isolation and control, far away from anyone who might be watching. So you're probably asking, how did he pull this off? How do you keep something like this a secret for so long? Well, the island itself was basically a fortress. You could only get there by private boat or helicopter. There were security checkpoints, different buildings. The whole thing was set up so people could move around without being seen. But the real secret sauce was the legal loophole. It operated in this kind of gray area, just outside the real reach of local law enforcement. That's how it stayed off the radar for years. Okay, so the island was the where. But what about the how? This wasn't some random thing. It was a machine. A full-blown, systematic operation designed from the ground up for one purpose: exploitation.
So investigators found this pretty clear pattern, like a three-step funnel. Step 1, the bait. They'd make these deceptive offers, jobs for massages, assistant work, travel, usually targeting girls, 14 to 17, who really needed the money. Step 2, isolation. Once a girl was in, she'd be brought to one of his private properties, completely cut off. And that's where the power dynamic flipped completely. And then, step 3, they'd pressure the victims to recruit other girls. It created this horrible, expanding web.
And this is where we have to talk about the actual crime. Legally speaking, the term is sex trafficking. Now, under federal law, that doesn't just mean using force. The key parts are inducement, basically luring a minor with fake promises, and then taking them across state lines or even international borders for a sexual purpose. And that is what makes these crimes so incredibly serious on a federal level.
Okay, so if the crimes were so serious and the pattern was so obvious, the big question is, why wasn't he stopped? Why did this go on for so long? And that, my friends, brings us to the first massive and frankly stunning failure of the justice system, that infamous 2008 sweetheart deal.
Just look at this timeline. It tells you everything you need to know about how this all went wrong. It starts back in 2005 with teenage girls actually going to the police. For 2 years, police investigate and they build a solid case. Multiple victims, a clear pattern, it's all there. So they hand it over to the federal prosecutors. It looks like a huge trial is about to happen. But then, 2008, suddenly it all goes quiet. Why? Because behind closed doors, Epstein's legal team cut a secret deal, a non-prosecution agreement that just made all those federal charges vanish.
So what was the punishment for all of this? For years of systematic abuse? 13 months. That's it. After dodging those massive federal charges, he pleaded guilty to some lesser state crimes, and they gave him just 13 months. Not in a federal prison, mind you, but in a local county jail. It's just a stunningly light sentence for a case like this.
And get this, it gets even crazier. Even during that short sentence, he had work release privileges. That meant he was allowed to leave the jail for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and just go to his office. I mean, for the victims, for everyone watching, this wasn't justice. It was a flat-out mockery of it.
So after that, he gets out, and he goes right back to his life of luxury, the private jet, the mansions. For about a decade, it really seemed like he'd gotten away with it, like the story was over. But it turns out, the fight for justice was just on pause.
And that leads us to 2019. The story explodes back into the headlines. There's new evidence, a ton of public pressure, and suddenly the justice system has a second shot, a do-over. The question on everyone's mind was, were they going to get it right this time?
And that second chance came, big time. July 2019, Epstein's private jet touches down in New York, and boom, federal agents are right there waiting for him. And this time, things were completely different. No deals, the charges were the big ones, the federal sex trafficking charges he'd escaped before. The judge denied bail, there was no work release, the party was over.
But the trial the entire world was waiting for, it never happened. A little over a month after he was arrested, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. Now, the official cause of death was ruled as suicide, but you've probably heard about all the controversy. Reports of malfunctioning cameras, guards who supposedly fell asleep. It just fueled this massive fire of speculation and left all the most important questions without an answer. His death ended the criminal case, but it definitely didn't end the story.
So Epstein the man was gone, but the shadow of his network, that was still there. And the focus immediately shifted to this huge collection of documents that everyone hoped would finally reveal the true scale of his operation and, more importantly, the powerful people who were in his orbit.
All right, so let's talk about the Epstein files. You hear that term thrown around all the time, right? But what is it, really? Well, it's not some single top-secret government report. It's actually a massive collection of court documents from civil lawsuits that victims filed against him over the years. And as judges started unsealing these files, we got access to all kinds of stuff. Sworn depositions, witness statements, private flight logs, all these little pieces that give us a window into his world.
And of course, these files just poured gasoline on one of the biggest theories out there, blackmail. The idea that Epstein wasn't just an abuser, but that he was also collecting dirt on his powerful guests to use as leverage. Now, there are some things that point in that direction, for sure. His properties had these strange surveillance systems, and victims talked about his intense need for control. On the other hand, there's no smoking gun, there's no official record, and prosecutors could never prove in court that he actually blackmailed anyone.
But look, regardless of any single theory, the impact of these documents getting out was absolutely huge. First, and most importantly, they finally gave some validation to the survivors, whose stories had been ignored and disbelieved for so long. Beyond that, they kicked off this massive global debate about the corrupting influence of wealth and power, put a ton of pressure on major institutions, and cast a very harsh spotlight on his whole network of powerful associates.
And that really brings us to the big, lingering question at the heart of all this. The Epstein saga forced the world to confront a really uncomfortable truth about how wealth can sometimes insulate the powerful from any real accountability. It's a story with no simple ending, and it leaves us all to ask, when extreme power and absolute secrecy collide, is the failure of our justice system inevitable?